Hello, this is Andrew with Bike, and this is a recap for the 2024 Dust Bowl. The race happened in Eminence, Indiana, which is about 20-25 minutes west of Indy. I did the 100-mile version. There is also an 80 and 44-mile version. I posted the whole race video a few days ago. There will be a link in the description if you're interested. Dust Bowl is a large race. Over 1,000 people signed up for the three distances. 100-mile was the most populated with 512. Not quite Unbound or Big Sugar level, but in that pool. You've definitely heard of the sponsors: Zip, USWE, Rudy Project. The 100-mile race was won by a pro. Fairly confident the rest of the podium and further down was pro as well. There were a lot of hitters there. Normal people like me aren't riding for a podium. I lined up on Saturday knowing I was going to lose a gravel race that day. It's not a bad thing, and in many ways it made it easier because safety was an issue on Saturday. First, let's talk about the high-level stuff. Great communication and vibe before getting to the event location. Everything was well organized leading up to the event. There was a safety talk where the slippery corners, tall corn, crossing highways, and bridges at 13.4 and 65 that were closed to road traffic were called out, along with a mention of 2 more downhill plus bridges where riders need to manage their speed. We're going to talk about one of those 2 downhill bridge features when we chat about the course in a second. I am including all of this because I want to be as fair as I can. There was a good sense of shared community responsibility by the riders during the race. Not all races are like that. This kind of vibe probably flows from the organizers, and I think they did a good job of facilitating a good, friendly, while also competitive vibe. That said, I have very mixed feelings about the race. There are some places where I think the organizer could have done things differently. One is a niggle, one is very serious. I don't know that any of this is fixable. Let's start with the niggle. This might just be a me problem. This one's easy. There was no beer available at the finish, and we were prohibited from bringing beer to the event. This was clear in the excellent pre-race communication. I get it. The race is in Eminence, Indiana. Much of Indiana is culturally inconsistent with my values. The organizer can do what they want. They make the rules, and we should follow them. And I did. But I didn't like it, and I have a choice about what and where I spend my money during event sign-up season. There is nothing I want more than a cold, crisp, potentially cheap, lager-ish kind of beer after a race. Probably 2. And if I'm hanging around longer, 3. Nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. The why isn't important, but it's mostly because I'm mainlining sugar for the entire time, and that's the best thing to wash the taste out of my mouth. I also like beer. On its own, that's not the end of the world, but it does mean I'm not hanging around for very long afterwards, which is something I enjoy about doing these kinds of events. It's nice to be able to chat it up with the people who are there, who did the event, who suffered with you, leading into the community and shared experience. I am going to do less of that if there's no beer. That's just a fact. I have mentioned this before. The other problems are safety issues with the course, which I'm not sure if there is the will to fix, or even if they can be fixed. We'll get into that in more detail, but just to wrap it up here, I don't think I will be doing the Dust Bowl again. I didn't feel comfortable taking photos of all the people who were walking around with fresh injuries, but my back of the envelope calculations put the damage around 20% of the riders. That is higher than any race I have ever attended. It has never occurred to me to track that, but it was so obvious in a way that I couldn't help but notice and start counting. The beer thing is really annoying. I can get over that, but I am unwilling to compromise around safety. I want to go home whole after a race. I need to do everything I can do to make that the most likely outcome. I think this race is just too risky for me to do again. And just to be clear, this is how I feel. It's totally fine for others to feel differently. There are so many gravel options in the same category. Like I said before, I get to choose which ones I do. If I'm taking off a day of work to get to a race, staying at a hotel and coming home really late after, there are so many options. Why would I choose one with all these negative factors? this is probably a good time to say like and subscribe because the next part's going to be rough. Let's talk about the course. After looking at the course, the basic problems were obvious. I was 50-50 on whether I was even going to race it or just show up and let the groups go and do a 100-mile Grand Fondo with some friends who would also be there. The lizard brain got the better of me and I did race it, but it was worse than I expected. If you've seen any of my other recaps, you know that I bang on about course design, how important it is to create separation early. There weren't any real features to do that. It might seem that way if we ignore the y-axis, but if we dig into this a little bit, the biggest hill in the first 10 miles, it has an average gradient of 0.5% over 3.1 miles. You're not going to notice that. What you do notice is that there are 4 turns in those 3.1 miles. Each of those turns is on loose gravel over hard pack. So you're slowing down or you're on the floor. Those turns and the associated sketch is the thing that creates separation. It also introduces risk. I'm going to put a graph up of my numbers for the first 30-ish minutes. Even if you didn't know what the course looked like, you can see the slam on the brakes, sprint, repeat in that graph. What you can't see is all the sketchy around you as other riders make questionable decisions to gain advantage. I don't do crits, scare me. I don't need that kind of risk in my life. There are 113 turns on the 100-mile route, which after doing some quick math means that on average you're making a turn every 0.896 miles. Every one of those turns that happens on gravel or with a hint of gravel, remember even if you're on pavement there's still gravel. One of my teammates put his bike down in a corner like that on Saturday, carries risk. It's not necessarily a problem on its own, but because there are no hills and there is a corner every 0.896 miles, it is very difficult to snap the elastic and create small groups of similar ability. It's a lot harder to navigate that many sketchy corners in a large group. That's just a fact. But that's mostly just a thing to be aware of with this race. If it was just that, I wouldn't be as quick to say I would never do it again. I wouldn't do it again because of this downhill plus bridge. Looking back at my video, there are 2 fast downhill and 1 caution signs leading into an off-camber gravel corner that will seriously injure or kill someone eventually. The 1 caution sign comes too late. I was on the brakes coming down that hill. I still ended up going off the road and almost running into a car parked on the side. There were 3 riders collecting themselves when I went through. One of them looked to be in a bad way. I think the inclusion of that descent and corner is irresponsible. I don't think it belongs in any organized ride, let alone a race. The lack of appropriate signage at the top is also irresponsible. Fast downhill isn't good enough. It does not capture the level of danger and risk in that section. There was another fast downhill before this one. It was notable, but it wasn't going to kill anyone. It wouldn't be hard to put up signs that actually convey the level of danger and some hay bales at the bottom to catch the riders who messed it up. If this section needs to be in the race, that seems the responsible minimum. But why? It doesn't need to be there. How many people need to get hurt before they take it out? I was lucky to have done it alone. The front group wasn't. A lot of people went down. It's unnecessarily dangerous. It should not be there. Oddly enough, in some ways, the earlier warnings, both in the safety talk and signage around the other bridges and hazards, made that section more dangerous. They made a big deal about the bridge at 13 in the safety talk. It was important for them to do that. It's good they mentioned it, but it was nothing in context. Everything exists on a relative scale. They made a big deal about that bridge and mentioned the 2 fast downhills in passing. It frames the danger. That's irresponsible. As much as I'd like to be done beating this horse, I can't because we also need to talk about the finish. They put 2 narrow choke point turns at the finish. I was solo at this point, so it didn't matter to me, but why? Why put features like that in a place where people will be going full gas lizard brain? I've done other races that have CX mountain bike section at the end. I have no problem with that. Most of the time they're fun. That's totally fine. It's not the grass or mud or sand that's the problem. It's the choking into hard points. made worse by turns. Too many riders contending for the first one, someone's going to go into a tree. Overcook the turn, might end up in another tree or the ditch. Same thing for the second one, but instead of trees, it's a couple of structural handrails and 2 ditches. You hit a tree or handrail at 20 miles an hour or more, that's going to do serious damage. That seems irresponsible. I don't know how else to say it. Again, it's just me. Everyone needs to figure out what level of risk they're comfortable with. I am not comfortable with that. Let's get to the race. Edgiest neutral start I've ever done, lots of rubber banding, which is kind of a weird neutral start. I already mentioned a little about what the start looked like when we started racing. It was a full gas crit. I say that never actually having done a crit, just having watched them, slow down for a corner, sprint out of it, do the numbers to stay with the group. I started seeing behaviors that made me uncomfortable. I lined up knowing I was going to lose a race on Saturday. Actually, back up. I line up at every race knowing I am going to lose a race. Let's just make that clear. Most of the risk in gravel is people over their skis. Opting to fall back to a smaller, slower group mitigates most of that. Knowing that no matter what the outcome, I am losing a bike race that day helps make that decision easier. So after doing crit for 12-ish miles and knowing there was a massive hazard coming around 13, I figured it was time to let them go. Did you see the bridge? If you're thinking, that bridge? Same. Remember, relative scale of hazards. That was worth a mention, but nowhere close to the level of danger at 49.1. I did a couple solo miles until I got swept up by a group, then spent the next 30 miles trying to get away from them. Every so often, someone would attack. Sometimes it was me. I did a lot of work in that group. Every time there was a corner or worse, a series of corners, the group would get back on. Only a few people in the group were willing to work. Everyone else was sitting in. I and a couple of other riders tried to get a rotation going, but it never stuck. It's really tough to convince people to build an engine room in a larger group when only 3 or 4 people want to work. So I did long, stupid pulls, tried to get in every move that went, and tried to make my own moves. Couldn't get anything to stick. The only thing that created gaps were the few hills on the course. Those that were willing to work made them hurt. There were still 10 plus people in the group, which is too many. Finally had some nice rollers on a straight bit of road, and I got away. My hope was that 2 or 3 other people would join me and we could rotate to make it permanent. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Rode solo for 5 miles, then a couple guys from the group caught me. They were both really strong. When it was the 2 of them, I could sit in at tempo, but then one stopped to get some water. The guy that didn't stop was doing numbers I can't do. Even just on his wheel was not a sustainable target. He rode away from me a couple miles later when he saw a group up the road. I rode solo until around 68 when I got caught by a group as we were riding on a bike path. And I say group, but it was really just a couple of guys pulling a group. I have mixed feelings about the bike path being in the course. It was totally fine solo, although there were lots of other folks out there who might not have been racing. But there were poles on there to keep cars from getting in. In a small group, that's not a problem. In a large one, there too, potential for some danger. I was with them when we crossed over a 2-slat bridge that should have been called out in the safety talk. Not a huge issue, but something that is worth making note of. If you don't get your line right, something bad might happen. One of the guys was an absolute unit. Every time he went to the front, we would know it. He could have ridden away from all of us, but I think he was riding for a teammate, maybe his daughter. He kept looking back to make sure she was still there. He was great with the other riders on the course too, not just in our group. This is a good example of a place where other riders were making an effort to do right by other folks at the race. When I saw moves going, I tried to get in them, but then got caught napping when these 2 slipped away. It was such a nothing place for them to shed us. I didn't realize quickly enough what had happened. When I did finally realize what had happened, I tried to chase them down. Got close, but not close enough. This is when my back blew up, hard. Before then, I was feeling pretty good. Legs felt great, which is why I kept beating on myself. My bonus goal for the day was to see how much training load I could generate, which was part of the reason I was riding stupid. Even when my back started bothering me again around the 3-hour mark, the legs felt fine. So I just ignored it and kept doing what I was doing. That turned out to be a bad strategy. My back locked when I would reach for the power. I could do the number, but then my back would say, nah. So when the group caught me a few minutes later, I couldn't even latch on the wheels. Figured fine, I'll just ride it in, try to limit the damage. Stopped briefly to fill up a bottle at the last aid station. Felt okay when I left. As soon as I started moving again, it clamped hard. I could only pedal one leg, and even that leg wasn't working right. I have either 1 or 2 herniated discs in my lumbar spine. Last year, I had 2 surgeries to try to fix one of them. That's why I say 1 or 2. I don't know what the actual status is right now. It doesn't matter if the disc is herniated or if there's still so much scar tissue hanging out there that it might as well be. For the most part, I can do stuff like this, but funny things happen to my hamstrings because of that. So when my back seized, it must have pinched the crap out of the sciatic nerves. I had to stop, stretch the back, stretch the hamstrings, give everything a moment to settle down for real. Once I did it, the back was fine enough that I could do the last 12 miles solo at a decent pace and ride through the finish. Although I was not able to hold off a couple guys who passed me right as we entered the CX section at the end. Ended up 8th in my age group and 51st overall. Very respectable results. I cannot be disappointed with that. But I don't really race for a result, not in that sense anyway. I race because it motivates me to train, to tweak, to play, and to get better at the things that I think are important. Which is a big part of why I do this recap. Forcing myself to watch the race video, think about the event, the things that went right and the things that didn't are incredibly useful. So what are my takeaways? The most obvious one is that I need to respect the back signal. Paying closer attention when it's uncomfortable might mean that I don't have to stop to regain the use of my legs. It's only ever gotten really uncomfortable in the other events. I should not have tried to find out what would happen if I just ignored it. Although, mission accomplished. I still need to work on nutrition a little. Going to bump up the sodium in the next event. Probably also going to bump up the carbs. I had no problem doing big numbers for the 5 hours I was out there, which means I can do more. Pushing the volume of carbs was probably why my legs felt as good as they did. I did not ride a smart race. That was mostly intentional. I would have placed better if I had ridden smarter. That said, I don't really care. The goal was to shock the legs, get a big training load, and get a benchmark for my fitness. Last year was a rough year. I have been trying to recapture the fitness that I had before I had to take time off. I have never done the numbers that I did on Saturday, not in any race. I trimmed off the neutral start because it wasn't part of the race. Whenever I look at my numbers, I always do that. It just doesn't make any sense to include it. Just so it doesn't go unsaid. I'm not a pro. I have never been a pro. I'm just a normal person who likes to ride bikes. I weigh around 70 kilograms. First 2 hours, normalized power was 267 watts. Moved it out to 3, normalized power was 259 watts. 248 watts normalized at hour 4 and 237 for the whole thing. That's 5 hours with a zone 3 normalized power. I have never done that before. I bet you can guess by looking at the graphs. When I was solo, power gets a lot less spiky, but you can also see all the corners. I am very pleased with that. Now I just got to figure out the back thing. Wrapping up, the part about the course and safety might seem overly negative or overly critical. I don't want it to get lost that the organizer did most things right. They nailed the pre-ride communication. I love the 50-page PDF. They nailed creating a single route that everyone knew was the right route for the 2024 race. Even though the neutral start was a bit strange, it was still a neutral start that got everyone out of town on their bikes, moving in the same direction. I'm not aware of anyone who crashed or anything, so we'll call that a win too. But the things they didn't get right scare me. I think it's unlikely that these things will change. I'm not sure that there's a desire from the organizer. Apparently these issues happen every year. I'm not sure that there's enough push from the people who do these events to force change. There is a weird celebration of dangerous elements in gravel courses that I do not understand. It is not just Dust Bowl either. This is an event that is mostly middle-aged men. I have a really hard time reconciling that fact with the level of risk and attitudes I see about these elements out on the interwebs. Maybe it's a vocal minority. I don't know. I think it is important for us to call out safety problems and push that feedback back to organizers. What I do know is that it is very unlikely that I'm coming back. Given all the options for gravel, I'm going to select events that I feel safe doing. That seems smart, responsible, all of that. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that useful. If you did, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I will get to them as soon as I can.